All right, let's make a start. I would love to welcome you to this webinar tonight titled Vaping, What Teachers and Parents Need to Know. I'm Darren Morton and I'm the Director of the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Centre here at Avondale University. Now, I was thinking this afternoon and I'm placing the time probably about a year ago that my youngest teenage son came home from school and said that someone in his class had got into trouble for vaping. And I thought, that's interesting. And then he went on to elaborate that he thought that some of the kids were actually addicted to it. And that greatly sparked my interest. You know, since that time, I've seen the problem, as I'm sure you have, the problem of vaping just escalate to the point that I've had senior school administrators tell me that it's one of the most pressing problems that they're facing today. And of course, as parents, many of us are very concerned and looking for reliable information and some solutions as well. You know, as you're about to learn in this webinar, as this is a relatively new thing, there are many things about it that are not well understood, and the vaping industry is actually very poorly regulated. For example, as our presenter will discuss tonight, lab tests have shown that all vapes contain nicotine, right? Even those that say they don't, which is obviously a major concern. And you may have heard that as of October 1, they will be only available by prescription. But what does that mean? What does that look like? And what are the implications of that? Well, here at Avondale University, we have a very special interest in health and wellbeing. And within the Lifestyle Medicine and Health Research Centre, we are just very fortunate to have Professor Renee Bittoun, who leads the Nicotine Addiction Research Unit within our research centre. Now, honestly, I can think of no one better to be presenting to us today on this topic of vaping than Renee. Professor Bittoun is the founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Smoking Cessation, which is published by Cambridge University Press. She's also a member of the National Health Medical Research Council's Working Committee on e-cigarettes. You know, clearly the government recognises that this is a real problem, and Renee has been called upon to contribute due to her expertise in this space. Now, there are many things that I could say about Renee, and I could take all her time, which I don't want to do, but she really is a luminary in this space who's made and continues to make an outstanding contribution. But, you know, what I actually value most about Renee is the person that she is. She's capable, caring and passionate. And I love those qualities, and when they all come together into the one package, something special is bound to happen, and Renee does remarkable work. I, for one, am very, very grateful that she has agreed to present this webinar to us today. Now, before I hand over to Renee, just a couple of things that I'd love to share with you about the webinar. First of all, during Renee's presentation, feel very free to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And at the conclusion of Renee's presentation, I'll direct as many of these questions as we have time for to Renee. The second thing is this webinar will be recorded and you will be emailed the link to the recording. So if there are things that you miss, because there's quite a bit that she'll be covering, you'll be able to go back and revisit that. So without further ado, I'll hand it now over to Professor Renee Bittoun.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much, Darren, and welcome everybody. Now, while I get this background out of the way and my presentation up, I just wanted to let you know what that background actually is. That's a crop of tobacco. If you've ever, hopefully, probably never seen, I better just go back to sharing my screen with you. I am screen sharing with you. Sorry about this. Here we go. That crop behind you is tobacco. And if you don't know, it's actually illegal in Australia. We've grown tobacco for more than a decade, really. And not all countries in the world are like that. And guess where you can still grow tobacco legally? That's in the United States. So is that pertinent to what we're talking about tonight? Very pertinent. So I'm going to explain a few reasons why Australia doesn't grow tobacco, its own anymore. So, and keep that in mind. This is a little bit about me, which Darren sort of said a little bit about me too already, but I want to make a point of letting you know that I have no conflicts of interest. When people talk about the topic of vaping or, pro or anti, whatever it is, keep in mind, some people have conflicts of interest. I don't have any. I don't work with, don't have any relationships with any pharmaceutical companies or any tobacco companies. Obviously not going to offer me any money, but I'm not on any members of their boards. I'm not in their subsidiaries either. And that's a point that you need to ask if you hear presentations about this topic. I don't get hospitality from any of them, and I certainly don't travel on their behalf either. I'm going to give you a little potted history of the e-cigarette vaping story. Why it's called vaping, by the way, if you didn't know this one, is because the tobacco industry invented the word to get away from the topic of cigarettes. E-cigarettes is how it comes up often in professional discussions about this on medical terms. They use e-cigarettes, but the tobacco industry wants the word vape to get away from the, okay, we know about cigarettes and people don't want to smoke cigarettes, but vaping's not the same language. So keep that in mind. Quite an insidious inroad now to our language, and most kids use the term vaping. They don't use the term e-cigarettes because that's sort of a cigarette, and I'm not smoking a cigarette, I'm vaping. So nuance of a difference, but a big difference really for kids and for adults as well. Little, as I said, potted history of vaping. Chinese pharmacist developed this for his mum, who had COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, obviously a severe respiratory disease from her long years of smoking. He thought, maybe I'll work on something that gives mum nicotine really quickly into her lungs without all the products that go with it, without the particulate matter from burning tobacco leaves, without the carbon monoxide, which he knew was bad for your health. So he really developed this. And of course, it's been wonderfully, can I put that in the right word? Wonderfully now a progress in how these pieces of nicotine delivery devices, that's the term, nicotine delivery devices, actually work. But in the beginning, they were quite cumbersome, didn't deliver nicotine very well, mostly in the upper airways. You want it really down deep in the lungs. And they had to look like cigarettes. So I've got a little plastic one here right in front of me. It's plastic. It's not a real one. They had to look like this. And they even glowed at the tip. I don't know if you've ever seen those ones. They're sort of gone now because now they're far more sophisticated. They don't look anything really like cigarettes at all. I'm going to show you some examples. They deliver nicotine far deeper into the lung in much higher doses. They're now called heat not burn, as in burning tobacco has a connotation of, as I said, the products from burning, like the tar, like carbon monoxide, like particulate matter that come into your lungs. That's what they're called. This is an example or a sort of a range of how they used to look. You might recognize some of this. You might have seen somebody vaping or looked at this up on the internet, and you'll see probably this box, which doesn't look anything like a cigarette at all. They've been somewhat taken over by the one at the end here, which looks more like a USB stick. Sometimes they're very small. Sometimes they can't be opened. These boxes and these ones here with their sort of mouthpieces, they can be opened and you can put content in them. But the more contemporary ones don't have anything like that, and you cannot open them and add anything to it. They look more like, and I will show you a little bit later, they look more like a contemporary, a highlighter pen. That's what they look like. And you can't open them. You can't break them open. You can break them open, but then they don't work. So that's what sort of the range and how they've progressed to delivering nicotine really deep into your lungs. So basically, the physical sensation of inhaling. Why inhaling? It's the best delivery of nicotine. Honestly, you can't get nicotine any faster. You can't get it through chewing the nicotine gums or the patches. They don't give nicotine levels, anything like it. You can, frankly, you can, if you have an intravenous shot of nicotine, it's slower, believe it or not, than coming through the lungs, which is straight into your arterial blood. Into your lungs is arterial blood. You're bypassing the venous system, if you remember this in any lung biology you might have ever done. What's interesting and important about this is they have propellants that help vaporize. So it's in gas phase, gets it down into the lungs really, really deeply. And what you get out of that is a shot of nicotine into your pulmonary arteries, which is fantastic. I'm not saying that's fantastic, but that's what it happens. And then it goes straight to the brain, up your, into the left side of your heart, and then straight up your carotid artery, straight to the brain. That's like essentially why it's such a shot of nicotine. Cigarettes give you a shot of nicotine. As I said before, those nicotine replacement products like patches don't give you anything like remotely like a shot of it. That's why we don't have any patch addicts at all. It just doesn't do it. So keep in mind, nicotine is absolutely critically the important ingredient. It's what generates, what sustains compulsive smoking. It's the primary addictive component. Some myths about this is that it's yellow. It's not. Nicotine's not yellow. It doesn't smell. You don't smell nicotine. When you smell a cigarette, you're not smelling nicotine. It doesn't stain your fingers or your moustache or your grey hair yellow. It's colourless and it's odourless. If you smell a cigarette, what you're smelling is the burning of the tobacco leaf, the tar. And the yellowness from the tar is like any leaf that biodegrades and burns up. As you notice, in autumn, leaves go yellow. That's what it is. It's not nicotine. So it's not yellow. Just keep that in mind. You can't really smell it. What you're smelling, if you're smelling from a vape or an e-cigarette, is you're smelling the flavourings. And often they'll put nicotine type flavourings or tobacco flavourings in the vapes, which is really insidious if you think about it. So the flavourings are going in the vape that smell like tobacco. Extraordinary, isn't it? So we know that nicotine is absolutely in vapes, as Darren said earlier. And what happens is, unfortunately, the psychoactive effects of this is that it goes into the brain. And when it does stimulate those nerve receptors, that's what they're called. If you've done some biology, I've only put it there for you to have a look at this and look it up if you've got this online later on. These acetylcholine receptors, which are distributed in the brain and are very susceptible in some people to responding to nicotine. And these shots of nicotine, keep that in mind, the shots of nicotine stimulate the nerves and upregulate, that's the term, to make more receptors. So the more you get the shots of these things, the more addicted you're going to get. I might add, or not. There are some reasons why people don't get addicted to it. So it's another myth about nicotine. It's a very short-acting drug. I'm calling it a drug because that's what it is. Let's call a spade a spade. Nicotine is a drug like all the others, and it's considered the most addictive known to humans. Very short-acting. In fact, it's got what's called a half-life of about 20 to 40 minutes. And here's another little bit of trivia. If you think it's trivial, I don't. Think about your waking day. Smokers smoke 25 in a pack. Why do you think it's 25 in a pack? Think of the half-life of nicotine is about 40 minutes. So by the time you've had some nicotine into your bloodstream, you start to get rid of it. And when you're getting rid of it, you're going to need some more. As I said earlier, nicotine from these devices are in nanograms. They're not in milligrams. Milligram of nicotine is fatal. A milligram, 1 milligram. So you can imagine if there's 1 milligram in a cigarette, a real cigarette, you don't die from that because, like vaping, if you suck on a cigarette or a vape or an e-cigarette, 80% goes out into the air. Now, that's really important to remind yourself of. 80% goes out into the air. Most of the nicotine is diluted by your lung volume and then by your blood volume. So we don't have nicotine in very high strengths. It's in nanograms. Keep that in mind because later we're going to be talking about these nanograms. But what's important to remember is there's a lot of nicotine going out there into the air. And if you're sharing a room or a car or a telephone box in the old days, right, then what you're sharing is the air that somebody's breathing out And if you're inhaling that passively, you're getting nicotine too. What smokers do and vapors do is they compensate for low levels of nicotine or high levels of nicotine by smoking these things or inhaling from them differently. If the vape's too weak, they drag hard, or the cigarette's too weak. Oh, and people go, oh no, I don't like the taste of that, it's too weak. They drag hard and hold their breath. You get a higher dose. Simple as that. If it's too strong, they puff it into the air, let it out. So unfortunately, we know that smokers, nicotine addicts, and this includes kids and vapors, they'll titrate to the nanogram very accurately. So I just wanted to point this out to fill up what's going on in their brain cells. And they're using nicotine, unfortunately, to help their brain function. So this is not a small thing. Where does the nicotine come from? As I mentioned before earlier, wasn't a joke, that we don't have tobacco plants, but that's where it comes from. Nicotine is not made in the laboratory, like it's, plastic or glass bowls. People imagine, we've got test tubes and that's how you make it. You don't. It comes from the plant. And where does the plant grow? Primarily in the United States. Big tobacco lobby. British American Tobacco is an enormous lobby, and they're converting now, and that's what they're talking, this is how they talk about it, to promoting and influencing with influencers on TikTok and various other influencing channels that kids get onto, YouTube, they get onto all sorts of websites. Keep that in mind, a lot of that is paid information that the tobacco industry is doing because they need to promote these products, because these are the cigarettes of the future. That's my view. Electronic cigarettes or vaping is a cigarette of the future, and they need, as you can imagine, they have phenomenal tobacco lobbying funds, enormous funds to lobby to do this. What nicotine actually does in the brain, and we need to be aware of this, recognize this, and acknowledge this. Why do people smoke? I mean, why would they bother doing something that is often well known to be contrary to your best interests? This is not in your interest to smoke if you've got respiratory disease, cardiovascular disease. Why on earth are you doing this? Nicotine is absolutely the prime driver behind it. And what nicotine does is it elicits, that's the term, or expresses, helps with the production in yourself of these chemicals like dopamine, norepinephrine or noradrenaline. These chemicals, and I want you to pay attention to this one particular, called a beta endorphin. An endorphin is endogenous morphine. You make your own morphine. And what that does is make you relaxed and less anxious. It helps you with your mood. If you're stressed, and kids say, I'm stressed, and nicotine will do this straight to your brain, and boom, beta endorphins, and you're a lot less stressed. No wonder it's so addictive. We need to acknowledge it does things like suppress your appetite, make you, and help you concentrate. There are many papers, many articles. Over the decades, I have read many, and a lot over my 40-year career. And what we do know is that, and we need to acknowledge it, that it does these positive things. Otherwise people wouldn't do it. If it was all horrible and it made me so unwell, like sick, yuck, disgusting, I wouldn't go on doing it. But it's these positive things that generate the need. And remember, it wears off. So smokers go through cycles, literally between cigarettes, or in vaping, between vapes, to get these effects. And remember, it wears off so quickly. That's the unfortunate trick, if you like, and hook of having to use it again and again and again. These are blood levels of nicotine, or plasma levels of nicotine, levels of nicotine in the machines that people sell, but our plasma levels are a little bit different, and I'll tell you about that. What we have had some information, we get this information from the sellers of these doses of nicotine in the vapes. Note that the doses in the vapes, low, mid-range, high, extra high, are in milligrams. keep in mind, we don't get milligrams when we're vaping or smoking, we get nanograms. But I want you to be aware of what they call the extra high dose, because later on I'm going to show you some unbelievably extra high doses that our kids are vaping. So keep that in mind. This is supposedly the standard concentrations. We know that they're not accurate, and even our departments, federal and state governments, know that they're not accurate doses, but this is what the sellers of these products, if they say there's nicotine in them, if they say that, this is what they're claiming is in them. What's a nitrosamine? A nicotine nitrosamine is a carcinogen, and some of these have been found in vaping cartridges. And why is that not, for example, in a patch or a gum or any of those other nicotine products? It's because of the high temperature, not burning, but the high temperature of the nicotine. It doesn't happen with patches and gums because they're not high temperature derived. Just point that out. Don't be worried or afraid of nicotine products. We're not, and I don't work for these companies that make them. The advantages over smoking, and we need to concede that there are some advantages, is because you're not burning it, you don't produce carbon monoxide, which is a lethal gas, as you know, comes out of the exhaust of a car, can kill you. Obviously, smokers don't die when they're breathing in carbon monoxide when they're burning a cigarette, but they have low grade or low level carbon monoxide poisoning, and that leads to thickening of the blood. So the prime cause and concerns we have with carbon monoxide in smoking is that it causes heart disease and blood clots, because of the accumulation of red cells. There is also no tar, so because you're not burning the leaf, it's already done, and what you're getting is the extracted nicotine, so you're not getting the tar either. No, does that mean we're not getting carcinogens? Watch this space on that, because we don't know. There's no particulate matter. So the potential is that we're going to reduce the heart disease and reduce lung disease. That's the potential. I'm saying potential because we don't know what the future holds with vaping, simply because it took decades for us to learn from, say, the 1910s when smoking took off to the 1950s, so 40 years later, hey, smoking causes lung cancer. That's when the first reports came out. So it took 30 to 40 years to get enough information to say this is carcinogenic. We don't know enough about vaping. It hasn't been around long enough, but there is this potentially. The disadvantages, I just might go back to one thing I didn't say, it's cheaper. It's cheaper, and that's a major motive for people who are smoking, because we know we've got some of the most expensive cigarettes in the world, which has driven our smoking rates right down. In case you think that's draconian, our cigarettes, if you don't know how much a packet can cost in a local supermarket, it can get to $50. $50 a packet is a lot of money, and so people are driven to vaping because it's cheaper. For the moment, it's cheaper for the moment. Watch this space on what's going to happen. The disadvantages are because nicotine causes vasoconstriction, because of that shot of nicotine, it causes vasoconstriction. Remember, this does not happen with these NRTs. Patches are slow, low dose, very slow release. I want to remind you, no patch and goes, oh, that's great, like, wow, relief. Or either use a gum or use any of those products that really, they're far too low and they're far too slow. But vaping is incredibly quick, raises your blood pressure, unfortunately, and causes vasoconstriction. So there are cardiovascular side effects we've now seen. And we've also seen that in passive vaping, which has also been a big concern. And we're going to talk about passive vaping shortly, but I want you to keep that in mind. In the lungs, we've had EVALI, which is a disease, and you can look this up, to do with the combination of vaping and cannabis use with these contaminants in it. Now, the vapes that our adolescents, children buy in Australia, you can't really tear that apart and add stuff to it. Adults might be able to do that, but adolescents by and large aren't doing that. But what are we worried about? We're worried about the inhaled flavourings, because flavourings are that. They're for your food to be ingested. Our Food and Drug Administrations, our TGA, our FDA, they approve these things to eat, but not to breathe in onto your lungs. So unfortunately, inhaled flavourings is a minefield. The best known one, by the way, is the vanilla one, and the best known effect is what's called popcorn lung. Look that up, popcorn lung. So we've seen it, and we've seen it in Australia. So it's really quite destructive. The effect and major disadvantages for us, and that we're going to be talking about more tonight, is the potential to become addicted to these fast deliveries of nicotine, fast, unfortunately, behavioural changes in our young people, and developmental changes in the adolescent brain. And this is, for me, the most concerning of all of these events that are going on in the last, say, several months, if not a year, that Darren was alluding to. We know that adolescent exposure to nicotine, has a substantial effect on behaviour and mental health and mental brain development in these undeveloped brains of adolescents. We know there are oral effects from vaping with regard to the flavourings in the mouth, the nicotine in the mouth. So dentists are on the case. They get updates about this all the time. They're going, no smoking, no vaping either, because it does the same dental destruction that smoking does. I talked a little bit about passive vaping, because that's a huge disadvantage for which now we're accumulating more and more data. There is little to no quality control at the moment for any of these vapes. None. So you don't know what's in it. Can you bet there's going to be nicotine in it? Why wouldn't there be? What else is there attractive or reinforcing about it, except that they've got nicotine in them, including what our kids are buying? But there's no quality control. Interestingly enough, once the tobacco industry is intensely involved with some of their products, they make sure that the quality is excellent, because they're responsible people. I'm being sarcastic here. They're not responsible people, but they say, oh, now our products are, quality control. So there's the problem with adolescents doing this, and my studies in the past have been looking at kids smoking, and now we're looking at kids vaping. There is a susceptibility of kids to in their brain, and early exposure, the earlier it is, the worse it is. There's a risk of never smokers becoming smokers once they can access tobacco, and we're worried about that and what's going to be happening soon. And there is absolutely, and if you hear this, please note, there is no evidence for this. There is no evidence that kids who are vaping would have become smokers anyway. We hear that from others, and the answer to that is not correct. We know that smoking in Australia, as I said earlier, we've got some of the lowest prevalences of smoking in the world. In Australia, we've got pockets, of course, of people and groups of people with considerable problems we're managing better. But by and large, if you look around and if you've travelled before COVID, you'll notice how many other people and other groups around the world smoke and how low the prevalence is here, and especially in kids. We haven't seen a growth of kids smoking anyway. In fact, if anything, it's gone down, which is wonderful, which is how we want to keep this. Now, of course, the tobacco industry knows this. If smoking's going down, well, we need to grow our consumers, I'm afraid, and they're going to be kids. So, unfortunately, nicotine addiction can start with the very first ever vape, The very first ever, we know this from somebody who came here to Australia, a wonderful researcher called Joe DeFranza, who you're welcome to look up, DeFranza, who's a psychiatrist who works in nicotine addiction in adolescence in the USA, who's saying kids are susceptible. There are some kids who are highly susceptible to this, and they will become dependent. They don't even have to be doing it every day. They will show signs and levels of addiction to it very early in the piece. And when we talk early in the piece, what are we talking about here? We're talking about like 12-year-olds. Adolescents. Is this pre-high school? Sometimes. My grandson was offered a vape. He's 12. He's in primary school. He's in the final year of primary school. He's 12. So don't just imagine that this is in older adolescents. They're offered this very young. Of course, it is very concerning for all of us. So within days, there is what's called a latency. The time between the vapes gets shorter and shorter. They have symptoms of withdrawal, which I'm going to show you in a moment. Girls develop this a little faster than boys, or females generally have more predispositions to becoming dependent on it. And this has got nothing to do with their personality, their risk-taking. It's got to do with the hormones, I'm afraid, and what estrogen does. And unfortunately, there are many chemical responses in the body over which you don't really have any control. There's all this, how do I put it? Am I allowed to say this? Palaver about addictive personalities. There is no such thing. We've been looking for decades. There is no such thing. Is there a predisposition to becoming addicted to something? Yes, there is. How does that come about? What happens to the brain? How you respond to it is the thing that makes you susceptible to this, which is really important for all of us to know. Don't think, as I said, that this is a personality trait or a weakness or a poor motivated, there's some weakness going on. There isn't. Unfortunately, a little bit about susceptibility. I want to tell you that nicotine responding to it in the brain is a highly heritable trait. Now, what do I mean by a heritable trait? It doesn't mean mum and dad have to have been smokers, but what it means is that you respond. It's a bit like, you've probably heard this. If you have, it's the analogy of an allergy. It's like having an allergy to something. Bad luck for you. You eat a tomato and you're allergic to tomatoes. If you never ate a tomato in your life, you wouldn't know you had it. But you eat a tomato and gosh, you get a rash. And some people get like a serious rash. It's a bit like that. We know that is the case, for example, in alcoholism. You might have heard that. There is an inherited trait. It's not a weak personality. It's exposure to the chemical. Once you get that chemical, unfortunately, into your body and activate it, and it goes to your brain, things happen over which you don't have a lot of control. So lack of control, I'm just pointing this out, lack of control, inability to control this is a hallmark of addiction. That actually defines it, in case you didn't know that. You think, why on earth would people be doing this when it's so bad for them? It's like hideously expensive, or as I said earlier, bad for your health. Why would you be doing this anyway? It's a hallmark of this inability to control something. It so dominates their behaviour. How you break down the nicotine in your body is an inherited trait. It's a liver function. And if you're a fast excreter or metabolizer of nicotine, bad luck for you, because once nicotine's in your body, you've inhaled it, it's gone to your brain, goes to your liver, and you get rid of it. You pee nicotine out. That's how you get rid of it. It doesn't come out of the pores of your skin or out of, I've heard this one, out of your soles of your feet. Not true. There's a lot of myth out there. It doesn't come out that way at all. It comes out in your hair a little bit, so we can test for nicotine in your hair. We test for what's called the byproducts of nicotine, called cotinine. So we can actually see if somebody's had exposure to these things. But if you're a fast excreter, when you get up in the morning, you pee it out. That's how you get rid of nicotine, as cotinine. That's what we do. And we do it incredibly quickly. And some people incredibly quickly. So the ones who do it really, really fast need to do it a lot. That's all there is to it. Don't think, oh, they've got terrible lives and they're so stressful. Their life is so horrible. They're smoking a lot. Go down what's going on in their liver, because that's what it's all about. So about kids who are vaping today, unfortunately, we know are about 14% of 12 to 17-year-olds. And this is not that old data, but it certainly isn't current, because currently, anecdotally, if you look around kids at school, is it higher? Probably is. Students having done it only once in the past month. There are kids who are doing it daily. We know that. Where do they get it from? They buy them for themselves. They buy it from somebody else who's selling them on. We know that kids line up in toilets. If you haven't heard this before, because they're addicted to it, they need to get a break from the classroom, get away. I can't concentrate, it's worn off. This is in the middle of the classroom. This is 2 hours since you've done it, down the loo, and there's a queue in the loo, if you haven't heard this before, for vaping, not to use the loo, but to actually vape in the loo. So these are important things that we are learning now, but also that indicate to us that not only are kids addicted to it, but a lot more kids than we've ever expected to. How do they pitch this to youth? We've seen the tobacco industry introducing flavours of all sorts. So you love, banana flavoured, vanilla flavoured. Have a look. There's a website called the Planet of the Vapes. Have a look at it and you can see what you can buy. It's extraordinary. The product range is huge. The flavours are huge and they entice kids into it. And we know that kids who are enticed into it go on to doing it, don't we? And that's what we've learnt. This is just to show you a website, on Facebook Market. This is very recent. I was given this 2 days ago. Now, currently somebody's selling this online. By the way, I quickly better mention, all of this is illegal. This is not legal to sell adolescents anything, not vapes, not any of those products under 18. Nothing. Even if they claim this has got no nicotine in it, a vape with flavouring only is illegal. None of this is legal. That doesn't stop, of course, what is happening. We know that. So everybody's aware of this, but this is not legal. To sell this to kids is not legal. This person is selling it on, buying it in bulk and probably selling them on. Now notice XXL fruity flavour. There's nothing about nicotine in any of this ad. Nothing about it. I'll just point this out. I get XXL. Pay attention to this because I'm going to show you something pretty scary, pretty frightening, and certainly frightening for a family, a recent family where somebody had serious problems from this one, which has got no marks on it at all that it contains nicotine. So I mentioned nicotine in the developing brain before. Our concerns have been like that for a long time. We've already talked about this in mums in pregnancy, smoking, how incredibly important it is not to expose a fetus, young babies through breast milk to nicotine. We know this through the breast milk, that mums and kids who are exposed to nicotine, however that happens, don't do well academically. They have significant behavioural concerns, aggressive behaviour, and it may lead to future substance abuse. I'm not exaggerating this, I'm telling you how it is. The other thing we're very concerned about are higher risks of suicide and suicide ideation, in particular with the younger the child is who's exposed to nicotine, the higher these risks are. Why is it so important and how concerned we are about very young is because it's still a developing brain. Some of you know, I hope, that your brain isn't really fully developed. You might be physically tall and ready to go, height, weight, ready to go. The rest of the body is ready to go. The brain isn't till it's about 25, not 15. and not 18. So these are not, think of the 24-year-old, the 21-year-old who vapes. Is this what you would consider an adult decision? Not if you know that the brain isn't developed till 25. It's late in humans. That's how it is. So don't go making or having ideas that this is like, as I said, an adult choice. Certainly isn't the case in your 12-year-old or your 10-year-old, which of course worries us hugely. This is a little overview about e-cigarettes for smoking cessation. The fact that we don't have any TGA approval yet of them, even though there are coming up new regulations. The TGA, our Therapeutic Goods Administration, still hasn't approved of this. What is really important for us and my working in this field, that people do these things often together. But what's interesting and important, as I mentioned earlier, is for our adolescents that electronic cigarettes might be a gateway, look like they're a gateway to smoking cigarettes later. So we've suddenly started to see this happening in our communities of younger smokers who would maybe prefer to smoke a cigarette over e-cigarettes. What we now know around the world is the opinions vary quite substantially depending on who's lobbying who. The WHO, our World Health Organization, is blanketly opposed to them, in case you didn't know that. Absolutely opposed to them. People are saying maybe we should let them in. People are saying there's not enough research. People are saying in the USA, of course, they're heavily lobbied by big tobacco, and they've got tobacco growers all over the governments, heavily lobbied. The UK is very relaxed about this all. But the USA now is starting to get very concerned about uptake in adolescents who've never smoked. And, the pennies drop for them that this is obviously a market where if smoking goes down in, say, Canada, Australia, the USA, fairly progressive societies where smoking is actually going down, it's socially unacceptable to smoke, there's nowhere to go to do it anymore, that people are going, smoking is going down. So we've got to do something about that, and that is to start up a new market of consumers. So the legal status in Australia is a bit of a mess. It's a poison under the Poisons Act, but things are going to change. And as I said, it's illegal in some states to get it. It's illegal to possess it, literally have it. I don't know anybody who's actually been arrested vaping, but it's actually illegal to do this in some states. But what's really impressive for me and important for all of us coming up soon, what are we now, 3 weeks away, on the 1st of October, all nicotine products, all nicotine vaping products and e-cigarettes will require a prescription. So that's going to change the game quite substantially for kids. Because if somebody is buying these products who's over 18, who has a prescription, and then selling them to our kids, which is what they do, that is probably going to halt. That's going to stop. So what's going to happen when our kids, who potentially are addicted to nicotine, cannot access this anymore? What's going to happen then is a big concern. Big concern. Just so you're aware that this is not a socioeconomic phenomenon, I want to point out one of my colleagues who's a doctor who is a respiratory physician. He's not, he's happy to talk about it, who is very involved with a private school where his kids go to. This is a collection of vapes from this private Upper North Shore school, because there's this inference that kids from sort of lower socioeconomic groups are doing it more. This is absolutely not true. And this really puts pay to the idea that kids would have smoked anyway. These kids would never have smoked anyway. There's no culture of smoking in this school for decades. Suddenly disappears. So these kids would not have become smokers. We've got no evidence for that. But what we have now seen is, as you've seen, is this epidemic of these vapes. I'm going to refer to this vape that I showed you before, was advertised. You will see XXL bubble e-gum ice vape with a bang. Now this is a vape being held by a mum who I can tell you about a little bit. This mum's son, who was 16, is 16, a healthy young 16-year-old whose mum found him, or at least heard him, hit the floor in his bedroom, like thud to the floor. She runs in and he's unconscious on the floor and blue, and she starts CPR. He's had a cardiac arrest. This mum just sees that happen, calls out, an ambulance is called. This young man had a second cardiac arrest in the ambulance. They know nothing about this. All they know is he's in hospital. He's had to be resuscitated twice. They find out in the end that he's been vaping, and mum doesn't even know what a vape is. She finds this on the floor. What's impressive and important about all of this, lucky for everybody, that this young, healthy young man, and I again tell you that no other substances were used because he was screened for everything else, as you would do normally, doesn't take any other drugs, has never done this before, and unfortunately had a cardiac arrest from overdosing on this. What's in this XXL bubbly gum ice product? As I said, poor mum had no idea. Mum and dad are beside themselves. They don't know anything about it, and there's nothing on this that indicates what's in it. We went ahead, a team and I in Redfern, where I consult with, we collected some vapes. Kids gave them to us, and I want to show you the contents of nicotine in them. Remember, this young man is doing this XXL. What does XXL actually mean? Not extra, extra large. It really means extra, extra strong. Keep in mind those vapes that I showed you earlier, at least the product information of some of the vapes. Nothing comes close to some of these vapes. Look at this. I sent these vapes to the Forensic and Analytic Services, the lab in Lidcombe in Sydney. These are forensic scientists. That's what they do. You know what forensic means. So, I mean, they really do this, and they were so shocked, they rang me shocked. They said, "Are you sitting down? Listen to this." Every single vape they tested had nicotine in it. Some had nicotine in it, like this cola ice. I get cola ice, 8.3 milligrams. This is milligrams of nicotine, not nanograms, milligrams of nicotine. Enough to kill a horse, I can tell you now, or two. And that 8.3, it means that probably all of them have about 100 milligrams. So that when those adolescents gave us or donated, volunteered us their vapes, they did not know there's nicotine in them, even though they know they use it for stress relief. They know that they like the taste of them. They're very faithful to their flavour. But interestingly enough, this one would probably have been used. So it's what's in the vape when they volunteered it to us. So I can imagine, and I know that for a fact now. So remember, this is at the end of May this year. We know for a fact that, you know, it's not unlikely that there's 100 milligrams of nicotine in them, in these vapes, which you can't break open, right? You can't add anything into it. So what are kids doing? How does it affect them? They start off by maybe doing it for fun, maybe from influences, maybe from their peers, maybe dad's doing it. They get a head spin and a buzz or not. Remember, you get a positive effect or not. So you might have vaped and thought, oh, this is horrible. Like some of us might have smoked and gone, nah, it didn't do it for me. And it does it for somebody else. Why did it do for them? Because they've got those nicotine receptors that are genetically an inherited trait to spark off. I don't have that. Do you have that? Some people do, some people don't. It's nothing to do with their personality. But kids get a positive effect, and they like doing it. It calms them down. They feel like there's a stress release there. They might be doing it, hey, it keeps my weight down, but they become dependent very quickly. As I mentioned before, they're very faithful to their flavors. I love this one, but not that one. And they're doing it daily at home, often alone. I did some research years ago on smoking at home alone. That was a paper. It was called Home Alone, because there's this inference that kids are doing this as a group together, you know, one sort of sparking off the other. Come on, let's go down to the loo and have a vape. That's correct. But there's also a good proportion of kids who are doing this on their own, by themselves, as soon as they wake up at home alone. That's a significant sign of addiction, a significant one. So how can you tell signs of withdrawals? Between puffs, don't forget, you don't have to stop smoking to get smoking withdrawals. You don't have to stop vaping. And kids between, from one to the next vape puff, will get irritable, angry, might get a headache. They can't concentrate in class. That's not unusual. And why are they out the door? Because this overwhelms them. It overwhelms them. They get strong urges, and you know, these are signs of addiction. They get strong urges to use this. As I said, that they keep their vapes close by, like this young man possibly did. At home, mum and dad had no idea he was doing this. It happens to have been on the floor at home, but keep it in your pocket because it's small. Wake up and do it within half an hour is significant on their own at home. And they can't help themselves. They can't restrain themselves. It's very, very difficult to not do it. So the negative effects and what we've seen recently, which is really quite concerning to all of us, is overdose or too much nicotine. I rarely see nicotine overdose. Actually, frankly, in my whole career of more than 40 years, I have to say, my whole career, I have never seen a nicotine overdose. Never see it. You never see it in adults. They develop tolerance to this. The kids seem to not have it. The growing brain doesn't do it. And so what we see is kids getting too much of it sometimes by dragging hard of it, getting a head spin, and then feeling sick, getting pale, throwing up, coughing, getting chest pains, a bit of asthma from the flavouring, some phlegm from the flavouring. We've seen this recently. We've seen presentations to hospital about this recently. As I said, it's not something you see in adults, but we now are teaching our doctors to recognise this, especially in health services. It's gone under the radar a bit, as you can imagine, with COVID, because if a kid presents like this to a hospital or comes to a hospital emergency department, first thoughts are COVID. But we need to ask more about what are they doing at home? Are they vaping? Do kids actually volunteer it? Often they don't. So do we need to test them? I think nowadays we need to not test for and screen for all drugs, which we just have to do, but to screen it for nicotine, which is a drug like all the others. We know long-term effects of nicotine. We've already known for years on their own, say, endocrine systems, so diabetic children, on their reproductive systems, on their respiratory, cardiovascular, and I mentioned their neurological systems. We've known that for a long time. What can we do in schools? Obviously, education about this makes a huge difference, and we've got teams now working on, in Redfern in particular, where I am in the central Sydney area, teams going around schools teaching kids, not always in schools, by the way, in various other venues where kids go or are, who might be vaping, workshops that are terrific about, which include games and various other things that you can do online. So it doesn't have to be in groups, to debunk the myths about vaping. Kids don't like the idea that they're going to be, that they're being had here, they're being sucked in, that there's long-term consumption of this, that you're going to be the smokers of the future, and that's what the pitch is. Kids don't like that idea. If that's the hook we can get them on, that's the hook we use. Do we hook with vape detectors in schools and toilets? Yes, why not? This is called a drip effect. Everything counts. do we suggest to non-vapers that they have non-vapers' rights, just like once upon a time we had the smoking, the non-smokers' rights. You wouldn't be sitting next to somebody today in a place who's smoking next to you. We don't have that anymore, and it's quite normal not to have that anymore, unless you happen to be going to a country like Greece, where somebody's sitting next to you, or Indonesia, where there's high prevalences of smoking and there are no laws like this. But we've got the laws, and smoking isn't allowed next to you. Why? That came about for strong passive smoking or non-smoking rights. We're going to be looking at the very same thing. Will kids feel confident enough, and they do, about smoking? Can they feel confident enough to talk about passive vaping? And that's an issue and an idea that we think could be fomented in kids, because they're stroppy enough about smoking. Can they be stroppy about vaping? It's an interesting idea and thought. What we can do at home is acknowledge that this is going to be difficult if they're not going to be vaping anymore, what they're getting out of it, why they're getting these effects from them. We have no guidelines at the moment, none, and I and my colleagues at Avondale are working very hard with the development of programs and the development of guidelines for yourselves, for doctors, for parents, to do something about this. We have it for smoking, but we don't have it for adolescent vaping. No pharmacotherapies, no guidelines at all. Do we treat them like mini adults? Can we put them on nicotine products? We can. This is what we might need to do. We're going to see, I think, these vaping products go underground with an increase of price, because the changes on the 1st of October will make a big difference to how they're going to access them. So I think they need to know that today. There's going to be a prescription required, and we hope, we expect that no doctor is going to give a young vaper a prescription for it. A 14-year-old, a 12-year-old vapor. But are they going to be showing us signs of addiction? That they will. And it is somewhat like having an outright ban. It is somewhat like having prohibition. Will it go underground? Potentially it will go underground. It is already underground, if you get my drift. It's already underground. Will the prices go up? Sure, why not? It's going to be a limited amount that people will be able to access. And unfortunately, if it's now $10 per unit, it might be, and I know it's going up, $25 a unit. Where are the kids going to get the money from to get it, to buy it? Where are they getting the money from already? Remember, the whole thing is illegal anyhow. Here's a little bit about first aid for vapers. We're translating what we used to do with adults, like at the moment, if you've got no facilities, there's nowhere to go to smoke, you're in lockdown, what can you do? Can we offer them proper advice using nicotine products? Can we do this with kids? We can. I think you should go to and see a doctor about that. But there are other things we certainly know, and this is all evidence-based, meaning we've got the data and the science behind this. This isn't just me saying this is a really good idea. This is actually a good tested idea. Exercise, short, sharp bursts of exercise, 1 minute. So if Johnny wants to vape and he wants to go down to the loo, Johnny's going to do 1 minute push-ups on the floor, because actually it helps with urges to vape, urges to use nicotine. We know that. 1 minute, not getting into your Lycra and going to the gym. It's a 1 minuter, and it mimics the effects, which is great to know. Believe it or not, glucose jelly beans, we use them in our clinics, in our smokers' clinics. Glucose jelly beans actually helps with an urge to smoke, because there's a little hypoglycemia, a little blood sugar drop, and it actually helps. And in good studies, we've we've known the science behind this is really interesting. Doesn't mean that you're going to put on all this weight, but it actually helps if our adolescent wants to have a jelly bean in the classroom, better a jelly bean than a vape, going up down to the loo and vaping. Diversional activities, you can imagine there are substantial things that you can do to get their minds off it. There's, you know, relaxation techniques that you can do. And there are sort of things we can talk about with kids in the classroom or or at home. Another aspect that you may not know about are these interactions between caffeine and alcohol. It obviously dawns on everybody that people that smoke and drink and smoke and, you know, cup of coffee and a cigarette, glass of wine and a cigarette go together. It's never a glass of orange juice and a cigarette. Keep that in mind. Why is that? Because there are these interactions in the brain of these chemicals, but also in the liver. So smokers and nicotine actually helps eliminate caffeine. So here's the irony. If you're a vapor or a smoker, you will get rid of caffeine a lot more often, a lot more quickly, which is why smokers and caffeine are significant caffeine users. And I mean caffeine. In kids, I'm talking Red Bull, Mother, the energy drinks, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. We're not looking at the sugar here. So it's not Diet Coke, Coke, the caffeinated drinks. If you're going to do something about vaping or reduce your caffeine intake, it will help hugely reduce your smoking or vaping, and vice versa. It goes both ways. This occurs also with alcohol. Not only does nicotine affect your blood alcohol level, which it does, so that it lowers it, which is why you drink more, why the pubs and clubs love you to smoke there, because if you do, or vape there, because you'll drink more. If you don't, you will drink less. So it stimulates an urge to vape and an urge to smoke, and they do go together. I've got there about smartphone apps and quit lines, and I'm just moving forward to I think one of my last slides, just to remind you of what you could do at home. Make your home a smoke-free or vape-free home. Obviously, everybody out. We can do that, and it's easy to do. So even if you're the vapor yourself, you're outside. Passive vaping, as I said, is substantial, but changing where you do this is actually a gateway to reducing it, where you do it. So you've probably, if you know anything about smokers, they hate smoking in their bedroom. Oh, no, never smoke in my bedroom. And they smoke it like a chimney in their kitchen. How do they do that? They do that by a mindset that's changed, which is very complex to describe, but they can, where you can't do it, they have less urges to do it. Keep that in mind. Where you can't do it, if you're going to have no smoking in the house, people accustom themselves very quickly to that. Just like having a brand new car, and I'm not going to smoke in my brand new car anymore. Do they do that overnight? They do that. Used to smoke like a chimney in their car, and now it's a brand new car. It's pristine. I want to keep it clean. So banning it, effectively, that's what you're doing. You're self-banning it. It changes a lot of things. So these are gateways, and we don't want kids exposed to the nicotine in the vape. It's not water vapor. So people say it's just water vapor. It is not. If you smell it, you've got it. And if you see it, you're breathing it in. So just keep this in mind. Everybody out. Can you put up a no vape sign here in your house? Sounds a bit over the top. But actually, we've done some studies to show that it actually helps, ironically. As I said, if you live with a vapor, you've got to avoid the vape. Reminding our adolescents or yourself why you don't want to do this anymore. Learn skills. We want kids to learn skills to say no. It's just like every other drug. How do they do that? Especially if they're vaping themselves now. In their head, do we do practice runs in your head? Practice runs, or even verbally out loud, so practice scenarios. This is commonly done. And also picture yourself saying no. These other ideas have also got some evidence buddy up with somebody else. Now, keep in mind, buddying up with somebody else who vapes, and we're going to not do this anymore, can go not always good, can go up together and they can go down together. So you have to be cautious about how this runs. One of the important, impressive things about vaping, and especially with kids, is nagging. And I see it all the time. I personally have seen divorces over this. She wants him to not smoke anymore, or they want somebody else to not do this anymore, and they're on their case all the time. That is very antagonizing for the user, for the vapor, the kid. Don't do that. What we want is positive, what they call invisible support. Don't be, how you going? How you doing? How you doing? If you do that all the time, be like somebody doing that to me, I'd be so irritated by that. And you don't want to be irritated, because irritation leads you straight out the door to vape again or to smoke again. So keep in mind, be very cautious about how you address it. We want to be supportive. We want to be understanding. We want to be knowledgeable. We want to know the positive things that they got out of it, but just don't be on the case all the time. And as I said, speak to the doctor about getting some what they call rescue medications, maybe some scripts for and you can do that now, even if we're in COVID over the phone, you can do that over the phone or telemedicine. So these are some references that we have available for you to look at about some of the things I was talking about. And I think I'm hopefully not that much over time that we can take some questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee. As you'll all be well aware by now, Renee's just a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and very, very passionate about it. So, look, we've actually got a whole heap of questions that have been going through. We've been wading through, and we've only got about 7 minutes or so to wrap it up. So I'm just picking some pertinent ones. I think many of your questions were answered as Renee progressed through the presentation anyway. Renee, I know, and I've heard this one myself. One of the comments was, look, I've got a 15-year-old son, and they say that the vapes that they're using don't contain nicotine. They get it from the local tobacconist. What's your response to that?
No, I'm sorry, very unlikely. Not very likely. The answer would be no, that wouldn't be correct. That wouldn't be correct. It's important to know what they're actually using. We can increasingly looking at testing for what's in it. If that child is doing this all the time, every day, and some of those symptoms that I showed you about, it releases my stress. If they're saying things like that, I love it, because, what are they getting out of it? Why are they doing it? It's not the flavors, it's usually the nicotine in it. So that's another way of potentially addressing it. Not so much, what is happening to the person when they use it? That young person, what are they feeling? Does it make them feel calmer? And so you need to have this conversation. What are they feeling when they do it? And that will really give you the clue that it's got nicotine in it. So that's number one. Number two is, frankly, I would be recommending that the police go to that shop, because they shouldn't be selling them to young people anyway. Anyhow.
And of course, the companies are highly incentivized to put nicotine in a product like this.
Oh, yes.
In the interest of selling more product, aren't they?
Of course. I mean, how perfect can it be? You keep coming back for more.
So another question, as, say, a parent, if we suspect that maybe our kids are now, in the day when it was smoking, it was very evident because you could smell that on their clothing. And are there the same signs with vaping?
Yeah, well, as I said, sometimes they put tobacco smell flavouring in it, so it smells of tobacco, so you can smell it. So if you can smell the vape, and I've known young people to say, oh, look, I don't vape, but I can smell my roommate. My roommate vapes, and I love it because it's pineapple. And I'm going, no, don't do that. Don't do that. You can't have that, because you're getting nicotine as well. And that discussion just has to be made, and it's very difficult. That example of that poor young healthy kid who was doing this, and mum and dad had absolutely no idea. And that's incredibly hard. How do we know? You just need to have today a conversation with every young person. Do we need to say high school? How about pre-high school, year 7, year 6? Definitely this conversation has got to go on very early in the piece nowadays.
It's interesting. I have 3 teenage children, and it's my youngest that talks most about it, and seems to be, you know, his friend age group. You know, he's in year 9 now, but it seems to be the younger, you know, earlier part of high school.
Earlier,
so,
yeah.
I'm interested. You mentioned this whole idea, which I think would intrigue quite a few of us. This whole idea of, if we're trying to encourage people not to vape, that the nagging approach doesn't work so well. What is the best approach, particularly if it's concerned about young people?
Yeah, it's in between, isn't it? I mean, it's like nagging kids, like they just turn off and irritate you. And I mean, it's like you, and there are so many cases like that with smoking, where the partner is everybody is very well-meaning. Everybody wants to see the health and welfare of that person that they're so involved with, right? Their loved one, so involved with. You must absolutely not do this anymore. And it so irritates the person that they're down the shed doing it because of it. So there's this nice in between, right? Somewhere in between, that you show concern, that you acknowledge the positive effects of it, and at the same time acknowledge that how seriously bad for your health this is. But acknowledge the positive effects. Otherwise, you're saying it's bad for your health. Why are you doing this? You're only making your asthma worse, or your heart, or whatever. Just acknowledge the positive parts, because people aren't aware. And keep in mind, unfortunately, this is the nature of addictions. People do it in the face of what's really bad for their health. They're doing it anyway. That's unfortunately a criteria, if you like, of dependence. So now that you know that, think of all the other substance people are using and abusing, and take a back step about that too, because there's not a lot of control there. There's not a lot of control. This lack of ability to control this. There's a term for this. It's called loss of autonomy. Not a lot of, you know, you've heard my colleagues talk about this. I know we have. You're not in the driver's seat of this car. You're sitting in the back. You're not in control. And that's what we have to perhaps just talk about. That kids don't know what an addiction is. They think they've got control. I like doing it. I love doing it. Makes me feel calmer. Makes me feel less stressed. They don't know the nature of addiction. That's exactly what these drugs do. And then they wear off. And
so you need to do it.
And they need to know these cycles, that these things happen in cycles. So information, education, and empathy.
Last question. We did have a question about vaping detectors.
Yes.
Where would we source something like that?
Oh, online. I know there are schools that are now doing that, and you can buy them online. I've seen them. Just like you've got carbon monoxide detectors. These are usually industrial levels things. Is this wise to put in your own home? Probably not a good idea. You know, people have thought about that for smoking. It's pretty draconian, and I don't think it's the way to go in a nice, happy family to put a detector in your home, but possibly at school, yes.
Professor Bittoun, I actually really want to thank you on behalf of everyone here. I think, you know, what you've shared with us is some of the comments coming through. It's just been incredibly enlightening. You know, I think at a time like where we're in at the moment with COVID, where we really want our immune system to be robust and strong, and certainly our respiratory systems. I remember you saying to me when COVID was first, you know, coming on in earnest, that there's no better time to give up smoking than right now. And certainly this is a part of our bodies we want to be protecting as much as possible. But I really thank you for what you're doing in this space. I think it's just so needed, and you know, we really admire the impact that you're having. And thank you so much for being available to us this evening and sharing all of this information. Thank you everyone for attending. We hope you really benefited from the webinar tonight.